She was forced to marry a poor old man because she was adopted, without knowing he was a millionaire. "She doesn't cry anymore?" the midwife murmured, looking down at the small bundle in her arms. The baby girl, wrapped in a tattered cloth, lay with her eyes closed, exhausted from crying so much. The woman adjusted the bundle gently, even as the sharp wind of the night storm howled through the cracks in the mud cabin. There on the packed earth floor, the lifeless body of a young woman rested, her eyes still open, filled with unanswered questions. She had died during childbirth, alone, abandoned. The midwife wiped the sweat from her brow, leaning on a stool. At that moment, the door creaked and flew open, pushed by the wind. But it wasn't just the wind. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, a woman with a strong build, her face covered by a scarf, and an expression that mixed exhaustion with determination. "Give me the child," she said, her voice firm and leaving no room for argument. The midwife hesitated. "Mama Aoife, you already have a daughter. How will you care for another? That's just one more mouth to feed." "I said, give me the child." The woman stepped forward. The midwife swallowed hard and carefully handed the baby to the newcomer. Mama Aoife received the infant with a deep sigh, feeling the faint warmth of that fragile little body. She had no idea that this act, born of impulse or maybe compassion, would become her greatest sorrow and her deepest regret. She named the baby Nkem, which means my own, as if the name could fill the void of what wasn't truly hers. She took her home, where her biological daughter Tari slept soundly on a mat beside the cold stove. In the early years, Nkem was raised as a daughter. Though food was scarce and space was tight, Mama Aoife shared what little she had equally between the two girls. But over time, the differences began to show, not in words but in actions. Nkem was a quiet, obedient child who never cried without reason. With large, dark eyes and skin soft as velvet, she turned heads wherever she went. Tari, on the other hand, with her upturned nose and lighter skin, was used to being pampered. From a young age, she believed she deserved more food, more clothes, more attention. As the years went by, Mama Aoife changed too. The compliments Nkem received from the neighbors started to bother her. "What a beautiful girl, Tom," the women at the market would say. "Is she your late husband's daughter?" they'd ask, eyeing Nkem as if she didn't belong in that household. And in truth, she didn't. By the age of 8, Nkem was washing dishes, sweeping the yard, and fetching water from the well. Meanwhile, Tari played with the other village children, her braids adorned with colorful beads and new sandals on her feet. When it rained, it was Nkem who ran to gather the clothes from the line. When the food burned, she was the one punished, and when there was blame to assign, Mama Aoife's eyes always landed on Nkem. Still, Nkem never complained. She believed that's just how life was. Some girls were born to serve, others to command. One afternoon, while scrubbing clothes by the stream, an older woman approached and sat beside her. "You look just like my niece from Enugu, but she's from a wealthy family, noble blood. Whose daughter are you again?" Nkem lowered her eyes and smiled without answering. She didn't know. The only mother she'd ever known was Mama Aoife, and despite the slaps and the cold stares, she still called that woman Mother. Over time, the village's glances grew suspicious. Whispers spread like weeds. "She doesn't look like Mama Aoife's child. Look at her features, her hair. That girl is different." Tari noticed too, and she didn't like it. By 13, Nkem had the beauty of a grown woman. Her skin glowed under the sun, her eyes seemed to hold stories from other lives, and her quiet way of walking drew more attention than any colorful decoration. The village boys would stop their games to watch her pass. The men lowered their voices when she came near. Tari burned with jealousy, and so did Mama Aoife. Envy seeped in like smoke, silent, inevitable. One day, Tari came home with fury in her eyes. "Mom, even the market chief's son only has eyes for her," she spat. "The daughter who isn't even yours." Mama Aoife stayed silent, peeling yams in the yard. "She is different," she said at last, "and maybe it would have been better if she'd never come into this house." Nkem heard it. She was behind the door holding a plate of boiled corn, the words cut like a knife. She froze, the corn slowly falling to the dirt floor. That night, As she slept on her thin mat by the stove, she felt a weight in her chest, as if an invisible hand were pressing on her heart. She didn't cry, but something inside her broke, a soundless crack no one heard. And that's how the hope of belonging disappeared. Now Nkem wasn't just the servant, she was the outsider, the imposter. And everyone in the house made that perfectly clear. She started eating only what was left over, if anything was left at all. She slept without a blanket, washed not only the family's clothes but also the neighbors. In exchange for a handful of cornmeal, Mama Ife called her the other one. Tari pretended not to see her. Still, Nkem did every chore as if exhaustion could erase the pain. Then, on a hot morning, with the sun beating down on the village's tin roofs, Mama Ife called her outside. "Get ready," she said coldly. "You're getting married." Nkem swallowed hard. "Me? Married? To whom?" "To Parkola." Nkem's body turned cold. Parkola was the old lame fisherman who lived near the Ogun River. He lived alone in a rotting shack that smelled of fish and mold. He was the butt of the children's jokes and the object of the adults' contempt. "But why?" Nkem whispered. Mama Ife gripped her arm tightly. "Don't call me mother. You were never my daughter. I should have left you that night alone, like you were meant to be. But now you're leaving. You'll be Parkola's wife, and you'll never come back here." Tari appeared in the doorway with a cruel smile. "Enjoy it, little sister. At least someone wanted you," she said, laughing. Nkem didn't reply. The pain in her chest was too deep for words. She knew begging wouldn't help. She was no one here. She never had been. And so that very day, with bare feet and a heart emptied of everything, Nkem left the house where she'd grown up. No wedding dress, no blessing, no music. The only thing she carried was the name that was never really hers, and a question that echoed silently inside her. If I was never a daughter, then who am I? The rain had stopped, but mud still ruled the village trails. The sky held heavy shades of grey, as if the weather mirrored Nkem's soul that quiet morning. She walked with short steps behind Parkola, eyes fixed on the ground. Her feet sank into the mud, filthy like the weight pressing inside her chest. The old man walked slowly, his bad leg setting the uneven pace of their journey, and the rhythmic thud of his walking stick was the only sound between them. The hut appeared ahead, like a memory forgotten by time. It was, in fact, worse than Nkem had imagined. The thatched roof had visible holes, and the mud walls were covered in moss. A strong smell of old fish and damp wood seeped through the half-open door. "This is it," said Parkola in his rough, emotionless voice. Nkem stood still for a moment. Her eyes scanned the house, then returned to the ground. She didn't know what she had expected. Maybe a gesture of welcome, something to remind her she was still human. But all she found was the creaking of the door in the wind. Inside the house there was only a wooden bed with a thin mat on top, a low stool, and an old pot in the corner. The packed dirt floor was wet in several spots. The silence was uncomfortable. "So you can sleep over there in the corner," he said, pointing to a mat placed by the wall. "I'll take the bed." Nkem nodded faintly and walked to the corner, setting down her bundle, which contained only a body cloth, an old comb, and a clay plate. She didn't know how she was supposed to feel. She was married now, officially the wife of a man she barely knew, and who didn't want her, just like no one ever had. That night, the wind blew violently through the cracks. The mat she slept on was thin and scratchy. The cold seeped in from every side. Nkem curled up trembling, trying to muffle the sound of her crying with the cloth she used as a blanket. Parkola didn't touch her. He turned over on the bed and remained silent. There was no celebration, no bride price, not a single word of comfort. Only the harsh, raw reality of a forced marriage, the fate of someone who belonged nowhere. The next morning, Nkem left early to fetch water from the well. On the way, she passed a group of women gathered near the market. As they saw her, the whispers began. "Look at that, Mama Ife's adopted daughter, now the wife of a lame old man," one said, laughing loudly. "That pretty girl now lives in the mud. Poor thing, she doesn't even have food at home," another added with biting irony. Nkem kept walking with her head down, gripping the water gourd tightly. Each word felt like a stone thrown at her back. Farther ahead, a familiar voice made her stop. Little sister. It was Tari, wearing a new wrapper and golden earrings, her eyes gleaming with poison. Nkem stopped and looked at her calmly. "How's married life?" Tari asked, smiling without warmth. Nkem said nothing, but Tari stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You should be grateful. At least someone took you. No real man would marry an abandoned girl like you." Those words cut straight to Nkem's heart, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked on. Tari's laughter echoed behind her like a scream of victory. On the way back, Nkem stopped at the riverbank. The water was calm. She knelt down, placing the gourd beside her, and stared at her reflection. For a moment, she thought she saw the mother she never knew. Or maybe it was just her imagination. The face reflected was hers, but there was so much sadness in the eyes, it looked like someone else entirely. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "Maybe I really am worth nothing." But even as she said it, something inside her, a faint, stubborn spark, whispered otherwise. That there was still something left for her, something beyond the pain. Time passed, and Nkem adjusted to the house's routine. She woke before the sun, swept the floor, fetched water, cooked. When there was anything to cook, Parkola was quiet, didn't ask for much. But he didn't offer much either. The silence between them was constant. One day she was coming back from the market with a basket of yams when she stumbled. The yams tumbled into the mud. The women around laughed. "She can't even carry a basket!" Nkem knelt to gather them, her face burning with shame. But then something unexpected happened. A hand reached out to her. It was Parkola. Without saying a word, he bent down and helped pick up the yams. His calloused hands worked in silence, and he handed the basket back to her with a steady look. "You don't have to carry everything alone." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. For the first time, she heard something that sounded like care. That night, while she finished washing the dishes, her stomach growled loudly. The sound was so strong that even Parkola looked up from his bench where he was sharpening a knife. "Wait here," he said. A little while later, he returned with a wooden bowl. It was boiled yam with palm oil. Simple, but in her hunger, it looked like a feast. "Eat," he said. She looked at the plate, then at him. "What about you?" "I already ate," he replied, turning to walk away. But Nkem noticed there was only one plate and no leftovers in the pot. He had given her the only food they had. Slowly, she took the plate and ate. Every bite warmed her stomach, but also something deeper, something that had been empty for a long time. A gesture of sincere kindness, no demands, no humiliation. Days later, while trying to lift a full bucket of water, she collapsed. Everything spun. The world went dark. When she woke up, she was lying on the bed. Her head throbbed, her body burned. Parkola was beside her, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. "You fainted." She tried to sit up. "I'm sorry." "Be quiet. You have a fever." With a wooden spoon, he brought a hot liquid to her lips. "Drink." She hesitated, then obeyed. The taste was bitter, but the warmth brought relief. And there, with the old fisherman caring for her like no one ever had, Nkem felt something new. A question began to grow in her mind. "Who are you? Really?" He didn't answer. He just kept changing the cloths and feeding the fire in the clay stove. But something in his eyes said, "There's much more behind this silent old man than the world sees." And for the first time, Nkem wanted to find out. The morning breeze blew gently, carrying the scent of damp leaves and smoked fish. The sun had yet to break fully through the cloudy sky when Nkem woke, her body still weak from the fever of the past few days. Her muscles ached and her head throbbed, but even so, she slowly stood up, bracing herself against the mud wall. It was hard to say how much time had passed since she had fainted at the well, but something deep inside her knew. Time waited for no one. In the corner of the hut, Parkola was slowly sharpening a small machete, seated on a wooden stool that creaked under his thin frame. His eyes were fixed on the blade, but he noticed Nkem stirring and spoke without looking up. You should rest another day. Nkem shook her head. I've rested too long. I need to fetch water and wash your clothes. He looked up, and for a moment she saw concern, but he only nodded silently and went back to sharpening the blade. In the village, the usual murmur had taken over the red dirt streets. Women swept their yards, children chased stray chickens, and vendors arranged their goods on cloths spread across the ground. When Nkem appeared with a gourd balanced on her head and a cloth tied at her waist, the whispers returned. "Look at that old Parkola's wife," one woman hissed, her laugh dry. "Bet she eats plain flour every day." "If that," another replied, "I bet he feeds her rotten fish scraps." Nkem ignored them. It was better that way. Better to pretend she didn't hear, better to pretend it didn't hurt. But the worst was yet to come. Tari appeared in the middle of the path like a shadow in costume. She wore a new wrapper adorned with gold threads, and her earrings sparkled with every step. Her hands rested on her hips, a smug smile on her lips. "Little sister," she said with disdain, stretching her arms out as if on stage, "still here? I thought you would have run away from your straw hut by now." Nkem stopped, trying to remain calm. "What do you want, Tari?" "Nothing. I just wanted to see with my own eyes how the chosen one is doing." She laughed, her eyes glinting with cruelty. "You know, Mama still says bringing you home that day was a mistake, that she should have left you to rot in the mud where you were born." The words landed like blades, but Nkem stood firm. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, but she refused to respond. Tari stepped closer, closing the gap. "You're nothing but an ungrateful bastard. And still you managed to get married, a miracle, but to who?" She let out a louder laugh. "To the lame old man no one wants, trash for trash." Nkem turned and walked away without looking back, feeling Tari's laughter echo in her ears like thunder. She sat by the riverbank with the gourd beside her and stared at the rippling reflection in the water. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. She thought of all she had lost, the house that was never hers, the childhood she never had, the love she never knew. She felt like a dry leaf carried away by the current, rootless, belonging nowhere. But in that same moment, she remembered the night before, the plate of food, the warm cloth on her forehead, Parkola's careful touch as he offered her the bitter drink, and like a silent flash of lightning, a question surfaced. Why would someone like him, hardened by life, mocked by all, treat her with such care? The days that followed settled into a routine. Nkem cleaned the house, fetched water, cooked, organized the dried fish Parkola brought from the river. They spoke little, but something was shifting between them, a silence less heavy, a quiet respect in their actions, a watchful glance that lingered. One day, returning from the market with a basket full of leaves and spices, she tripped on a root and fell. The basket overturned, scattering the food across the ground. Onlookers nearby gathered to laugh. One man with missing teeth pointed. "Can't even do that right. Got married and turned useless." Before Nkem could get up, Parkola appeared. He picked up the scattered leaves, helped her to her feet, and placed the basket back in her arms. Then he looked sternly at the crowd. "None of you have the right to mock someone who works harder than all of you put together." The group fell silent and dispersed, and Nkem stared at him, startled. "Why did you do that?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking, and she followed, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, after their simple dinner of boiled corn, Nkem was washing the dishes when her stomach growled again. It was the loudest sound in the hut. Parkola heard it. Without a word, he stood up and left. He returned sometime later with a cloth bundle. He opened it and laid it on the mat. Warm bread, roasted fish, and a small gourd of tamarind juice. "Where did you get this?" she asked, surprised. "At the market. I had some savings." "You didn't have to. You haven't been eating properly." She picked up the bread with trembling hands. The smell made her mouth water, but she hesitated. "What about you?" He gave a crooked smile. "I already ate." But she noticed. There was only one bundle, one portion. He had brought it all for her. Nkem tore the bread in half and offered a piece to him. "Please, Eat with me." He looked at her for a moment, then sat down beside her. For the first time, they shared a meal. The mat, once a symbol of solitude, now held two hearts that, though still silent, were beginning to recognize one another. In the middle of the night, the cold crept into the hut. Wind whistled through the cracks, nearly snuffing out the fire. Nkem shivered under the thin cloth she used as a blanket. Parkola, noticing, got up, took a thick blanket, and gently laid it over her. She opened her eyes slowly, surprised by the gesture. "You'll be cold." "Better me than you," he replied, returning to his bed. She clutched the blanket tightly, feeling something she had never felt before: sincere, quiet care. That old man, laughed at by all, was giving her more than anyone ever had in her entire life. And right there, in that simple moment, something inside Nkem began to change. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. The sun had already set by the time Nkem finished scrubbing the last pot from dinner. The hut was cloaked in dusk, lit only by a flickering kerosene lamp that sat atop a wooden stump. Parkola, seated at the doorway, was quietly sharpening a fishing hook, his movements steady and patient, as he did every evening. Nkem watched his quiet rhythm, the way he focused on his task without rush or pressure. There was a kind of serenity in him that intrigued her. He barely spoke, yet his presence filled the space like a steady, low drumbeat. She sat outside, the rough mat beneath her legs, and gazed up at the starry sky. From the other huts, voices drifted through the village, laughter, chatter, distant drums. But here, there was only silence, a silence that, strangely, no longer hurt the way it once had. Her stomach growled again, loudly and without mercy. Parkola paused his sharpening, glanced sideways at her, then stood and went inside. Minutes later, he returned with a steaming clay bowl. "Here," he said, setting it beside her. It was boiled yam with leaf sauce and palm oil. The smell was warm and comforting, and her mouth watered instantly. "You haven't eaten yet," Nkem said, frowning. "I already did," he replied, as he always did. But she noticed. For the second night in a row, there was only one bowl. No extra plate, no sign he had eaten anything. She picked up the spoon but didn't bring it to her mouth. Instead, she looked directly at the man in front of her. "You give me everything you have," she murmured. "Why?" Parkola didn't answer right away. He just sat beside her and looked up at the sky as well. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was comforting, almost intimate. "Because I know what it's like to go hungry and to have no one," he finally said in a low voice. Nkem felt her stomach tighten, but it wasn't hunger. It was something else, an old ache that recognized itself in another's pain. That night, she dreamed of her childhood, or the absence of it. She dreamed of Mama Eve's mat, where she slept on the cold floor, of the scraps of food given to her in a metal plate, of the indifferent eyes that never saw her as a daughter. But when she woke, there was a blanket over her, and outside she could hear the soft sounds of Parkola lighting the fire with pieces of dry wood. She rose quietly and stepped out, still wrapped in her cloth. She watched him for a moment, the way he tended to the house, asking nothing in return. "I can finish that," she said as she approached. He looked at her and nodded, handing her the stick he used to stir the fire. Their fingers touched for just a second, and Nkem felt a spark inside her, like something had been lit alongside the coals. Hours later, while walking through the market's packed dirt paths, Nkem noticed strange whispers. They weren't the usual ones, full of scorn and mockery. These were different, curious. "I saw it with my own eyes," said a woman next to the corn seller. "He bought fresh bread, smoked fish, even tamarind juice." "But how? Parkola doesn't have money for a bottle of kerosene," another exclaimed. "Exactly, it's suspicious. What if he's been stealing?" a third whispered. Glancing over her shoulder, Nkem's heart raced. She hurried back to the hut and found Parkola seated as always, sharpening a small wooden knife. "Where did you get the food from yesterday?" she asked urgently. He looked at her calmly. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," she replied, stepping closer. "They're saying you stole it. They're saying a lame old man like you couldn't possibly afford all that. He gave a dry, sideways smile. People will always talk. Either way, I don't care what they think. But I care, she said, sitting down beside him. I need to understand. Who are you, Parkola? He was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed like a man carrying a heavy burden. A man who doesn't want to see his wife suffer. Nkem had no words. His answer echoed inside her like a revelation. In the days that followed, the unease grew. She spent more time watching him, trying to find clues. The way he walked with a varnished wooden cane, the way he spoke Yoruba with a refined accent, like someone who had formal education, the way he knew about herbs, tinctures, and could fix things with uncanny skill. None of it matched the poor, simple man everyone claimed he was. One afternoon, she saw him sitting at the doorway, playing with a village boy. The child laughed loudly as Parkola tossed a piece of wood in the air and caught it again, pretending to be a magician. Nkem stood beneath the shade of a banana tree, watching in surprise. He was laughing, truly laughing. Not the shy half-smile he usually wore, but a clean, sincere laugh. The quiet old man, the lonely fisherman, laughed like a child. The boy looked at her and pointed. "It's the poor king's wife." Parkola's face turned serious, a little embarrassed. But Nkem smiled and stepped closer. "What's that about?" "He told me," the boy said. "He said he's a king pretending to be poor so he can find a wife who loves his heart and not his gold." Nkem froze. For a second, it felt like the air disappeared. She turned to Parkola, who looked away. "You told him that?" He shrugged, standing up slowly. "It's just a story." But Nkem knew it wasn't. Later that evening, sitting outside again, she replayed it all in her mind. The small kindnesses, the silences, the glances he never explained. And then she whispered to herself, why would someone hide who they really are? And with that question, she knew. She needed the truth. She needed to know, once and for all, who the man everyone called poor really was. Because everything inside her screamed that Parkola, whoever he truly was not what he seemed. Dry leaves crackled beneath Nkem's feet as she walked the path home from the market. The basket of cassava weighed heavy on her arms, but her heart felt even heavier. The story of the poor king wouldn't leave her mind. Every gesture, every word from Parkola in recent days now seemed to fit into a puzzle she hadn't even realized she'd been piecing together. The way he looked at her in silence, the constant care, the expensive food, the quiet dignity despite his apparent poverty. None of it made sense anymore. At the market, the whispers had only grown louder. "He bought premium dried meat yesterday," said a pepper vendor. "And paid with crisp new bills like he didn't even know how much they were worth," added a young fabric seller. "Maybe he's not really from Ogbomosho. Maybe he ran away from some big city," murmured another. Nkem quickened her pace, her heart beating like an ancestral drum. She reached the hut and found Parkola sitting outside, weaving a mat with bamboo straw. His serene expression stood in sharp contrast to the storm of questions churning inside her. "I need to know," she said bluntly, dropping the basket to the ground. "Who are you really?" He kept weaving the mat for a few more seconds before responding. "Why now?" "Because people are talking. Because nothing makes sense. Because..." She took a deep breath. "Because you're not just some old man. You don't talk like one, don't act like one, don't live like one. Even your sadness feels too rich." Parkola stopped weaving and looked up at her. His eyes were deep, like river waters hiding secrets beneath the Ogun's surface. "Are you ready to hear it?" Nkem nodded. He set the mat aside, wiped his hands on his pants and stood up. Leaning on his cane, he gestured with his head. "Come with me." She followed without question, her heart rising into her throat. They walked the muddy trail skirting the village, turned onto a path lined with banana trees and thorny bushes, and kept going. With every step, the world Nkem knew faded behind them. As the brush thinned, she saw it, a tall iron gate with traditional Yoruba carvings etched into the metal. Beyond it, a smooth stone path led to a large white-walled building with tall windows. Manicured gardens flanked the walkway, lined with palm trees and golden lanterns hanging from carved columns. Nkem stopped. "What is this?" "This is my home," he said, pushing the gate open effortlessly. She took 2 hesitant steps forward. Her worn sandals touched a ground that seemed made for royalty. The air smelled of flowers, incense, and hot food. But how? Pakola walked ahead with ease, like he'd never left. "My name is Kolade Okonkwo. I'm the son of Obadare Okonkwo, one of the wealthiest men in Lagos. He owned land, boat fleets, trucks, businesses across the country." Nkem stood stunned. "But the hut, your leg?" "I had an accident when I was 23. One of the company trucks overturned and I nearly died. I spent months between life and death. When I survived, my leg never healed right. My father, he called me a disgrace, said a cripple couldn't be his heir. He threw me out. I started over with what little I had left." He pointed to the house. "This is mine, not his. I rebuilt my life in secret, chose to live simply, waiting to find someone who'd see me, not my wealth." Nkem's eyes filled with tears. She stood face to face with the truth. All the things that had humiliated her, the hut, the poverty, the loneliness, had been part of a test, an illusion, but also a revelation. "You let me suffer," she said, her voice trembling, hungry, ashamed. "You let me believe I was someone's punishment." Kolade stepped closer, his face now shadowed with pain. "I never meant to hurt you, but I had to be sure. Nkem, you were thrown away like trash, and still, you held your head high. You took care of the house, took care of me, even when you thought I was nothing. That's worth more than any gold." She turned her face, trying to hide the tear that fell. The beauty of the house, the polished floors, the fine furniture, all of it felt distant, almost offensive. The memory of the mud floor, the cold nights, the shared meals was more real than anything here. "I don't know what to feel," she whispered. "Feel whatever you need to. But know this. I love you, Nkem." She stepped back, chest tightening. "I need time," she said firmly. "I need to know if what I feel is love or gratitude." He nodded respectfully. "You can stay as long as you want. The house is yours." But Nkem didn't stay. She walked back through the gate and down the stone path like someone waking from a dream. She passed the banana trees, the thorny bushes, and returned to the road. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed distance. She needed to breathe far from the doubt, the pain, the crushing revelation. Hours later, without realizing it, her feet brought her back to Mama Ife's house, the place where it had all begun. She knocked on the door hesitantly. Tari answered, dressed in a new wrapper, her eyes full of venom and surprise. "Well, look who's back. Life with fish and gold too hard for you?" Nkem didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were red but steady. "I just needed to see." "See what?" Tari mocked. "That I never belonged here." Tari smirked. Finally figured it out. Nkem turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "You know what's strange, Tari?" "What?" "Even living in that hut. For the first time, I felt loved." Tari's smirk faltered. "And even now," Nkem continued, "after everything I've learned, I'd still rather live in that hut with truth than in this house with lies." Without waiting for a reply, she stepped down and walked away with steady steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and purple. She knew nothing would ever be the same, but she also knew the woman walking away wasn't the same one who had left, and the man who waited, his secrets and pain hidden behind a wooden cane, might just be the only person who had ever truly seen her. Night fell like a heavy cloak as Nkem passed once more through the gates of Kolade's mansion. Her head was low, her thoughts turbulent. The garden lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow across the stone path. The silence of the place stood in stark contrast to the storm inside her. She could still hear Tari's words echoing. Was it too hard, living with fish and gold? But more than her sister's words, it was the weight of the truth that suffocated her. Inside, Kolade was waiting. He stood in the entry hall, eyes fixed on the door, as if he'd known she would return. When he saw her, he took a step forward. "Nkem," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes red but dry. "Where did you go?" he asked, concerned. I went back to where it all began. I needed to remember who I was before all this. Colade nodded, understanding. For a moment, they stood there, facing each other, wrapped in a silence that wasn't empty, but full of everything they hadn't yet said. "And what did you decide?" he asked. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I still don't know. I'm not angry that you're rich. I'm angry that you let me believe you were poor while I was falling apart inside, while I cried from hunger, while people humiliated me, and you were testing me." Colade closed his eyes for a moment, guilt pressing on him. "I saw your pain," he said. "And I swear every time you cried it tore me apart. But I was afraid of being loved for my wealth, like I've been so many times before." She bit her lip, her voice unsteady. "And did you think about me? About what it meant for me to be thrown back into a life of suffering again, just to be tested?" He stepped closer, eyes shining with tears. "I did. And I regretted it every single day, but I had to know. I had to find someone who could see past my name, past my money, someone who saw my heart." "And did you see me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "When I was kneeling in the mud, picking up yams, when I ate in silence, thinking that was all we had. Did you really see me?" Colade placed his hands gently on her face. "I saw you, and I fell in love with every gesture, every silence, every hidden tear." Nkem closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. Inside her was a whirlwind: love, hurt, gratitude, fear. But one quiet truth was rising. He had never treated her with contempt. He had never touched her without permission, never made her feel small. The next morning, the rumor had spread through the village like wildfire. Mama Ife was sitting on her porch peeling yams when she heard two neighbors whispering near the gate. "Did you hear?" "Hear? I saw it. That old man, that Pa Cola. He's a millionaire." The knife slipped from Mama Ife's hand, the yam rolling onto the packed dirt. "What do you mean?" "Owner of a mansion, cars, land. They say he has businesses in Lagos, Abuja, even overseas. And he's married to Nkem." The knife still on the ground, Mama Ife's face drained of color. Her mouth went dry. "That's not possible," she whispered. But it was. And the more she heard, the more her blood boiled. Her hands trembled, her chest burned. She clenched her fists. "That was supposed to be Tari's," she hissed. "Not that bastard's." That very night she gathered a few villagers, people like her, those who hated seeing others rise while they stayed in the mud. "That girl is not one of us," she declared, "and she's living like a queen. While we're still in the dust, we'll remind her that wealth doesn't erase where you come from." The men listened with greedy eyes. One of them, a known troublemaker, licked his lips. "So what do you suggest, Mama Ife?" "We go to that house. We take what's ours. That girl won't forget where she came from." The next day, the sky darkened before the sun could even set. The group marched through the dirt roads carrying sticks, stones, and shouts. Mama Ife led them, her eyes burning with hatred. "Nkem!" she yelled as they reached the mansion gates. Come out now." Inside, Collard and Nkem were at the table. Their meal was interrupted by the noise outside. Collard stood immediately. "Stay here." "No," said Nkem firmly. "This is my fight too." They stepped outside together. At the gate, the crowd had gathered, banging on the iron bars. When Mama Ife saw her, she spat on the ground. "You think wearing expensive cloth makes you somebody? You're trash. Trash I should have let rot." Nkem flinched instinctively, but Collade stepped forward. "Enough," his voice thundered. The crowd fell silent. "You've come to my home," he continued, voice steady, "to threaten my wife, the woman I chose, the woman I love. And I say this now, anyone who lays a hand on her will face not only my wealth but my wrath." Only the distant squawk of a chicken broke the silence. Collade's eyes blazed with controlled fury. "This house is hers. This life is hers. And none of you has the right to take that away." The villagers began to retreat, unwilling to meet his gaze. Mama Ife tried to keep her posture, but it was clear she had lost. As the group dispersed, Nkem looked at Kolade, her hands trembling. "You defended me." He looked at her with tenderness. "Always, and I always will." She wept right there, in the courtyard of the mansion, pressed against his chest. She cried out years of abandonment, humiliation, loneliness, and for the first time she knew she would never be alone again. Night fell heavy over the village, but in Mama Ife's house the silence was even heavier. She lay on the mat, curled to one side, eyes wide open, lost in the cracked mud ceiling. Kolade's words still echoed in her ears. "This house is hers, this life is hers." It pounded in her head like a hammer, a truth she refused to accept. In the corner of the room, Tari sat on a stool, arms crossed, her face hard. The glint of rage sparkled in her eyes, more bitter than bile. "This is your fault," she hissed, not looking at her mother. "If you hadn't forced her to marry that man, he could have been mine." Mama Ife turned slowly, her voice hoarse from screaming outside the mansion. "Don't talk nonsense. How could I have known?" "You always knew she was different," Tari shot back. "Too pretty, too quiet. And still, you threw her into the arms of a man nobody wanted." Mama Ife shut her eyes, as if trying to erase everything. But truth was a blade that cut from the inside. She had known. Known from the very first moment she held Nkem in her arms on that stormy night. That child was never hers, never would be. But she grew and became more than Mama Ife ever expected, more than Tari. And now Nkem was rich, powerful, loved. And she, the woman who had scorned her, was just a wilted shadow in a poor hut. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Mama Ife's house. The envelope had a golden border, Nkem's name written in elegant, careful strokes. The handwriting was neat and firm. Mama Ife opened it with trembling hands and began to read. "Mama, I know I was never your blood daughter. I know I wasn't wanted or loved like one. I grew up in your house with hunger, fear, and silence. I became a woman learning to serve, to be quiet, to endure. But despite everything, I do not hate you. I have a new life now, a life of peace, of love. I have a home with someone who sees me, respects me, and loves me. And even if I never return, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free. Nkem." The words fell over Mama Ife like a hard rain. She let the letter fall into her lap, her eyes brimming. Her chest burned with an old pain, not the pain of losing a daughter she never loved, but the pain of realizing she had failed, as a mother, as a woman, as a human being. She looked at Tari, who still sat in silence. "She forgave me," Mama Ife whispered. "So what?" Tari replied coldly. "That doesn't change anything." Mama Ife placed her hand over her chest. "But maybe it heals something." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Nkem stood on the balcony, watching the sun dip behind the palm trees. Kolade came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking about her?" he asked. She nodded, not taking her eyes off the sky. "I sent a letter. Will you wait for a reply?" "No," she said, turning to him. "I don't expect anything from her anymore, but I needed to say it, that I forgive her, even if she never changes." Kolade looked at her with admiration. "You have the purest heart I've ever known," she smiled, light, as though releasing a weight she'd carried for years. Months passed. Life shifted slowly, like a tide. Kolade and Nkem traveled together. They visited Lagos, Abuja, and even crossed borders. She learned about his family's businesses, met influential people, supported community projects, and donated food to orphanages. The quiet woman who once cried in the corner of a hut now spoke with confidence, wore elegant clothes, and made decisions beside her husband. But at night they would return home, take off their shoes, and sit on the porch to watch the stars, just as they used to in the old hut. Simplicity still lived in their eyes, in the way they shared their meals, in the comfort of shared silence. Then one late afternoon, Kolade brought Nkem to the garden. The flowers were in full bloom. He was nervous, more than he'd been since the day he revealed his identity. "What's going on?" she asked, suspicious. He knelt, and Nkem gasped. Kolade opened a small velvet box, revealing a diamond ring. The sun struck the gem, scattering light across her tear-filled eyes. Nkem, we began this journey through obligation, through desperation. But today I no longer want to carry any lies. I don't want to live a love hidden behind masks. He took a deep breath. So I ask you, will you marry me again? This time, by choice. Nkem brought her hands to her mouth, the tears falling silently. Then she knelt before him. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Kolade pulled her into his arms, and they laughed through their tears. This was not the forced union of a painful past. This was the beginning of a new chapter, a love forged through resilience, patience, and forgiveness. And there, on their knees in the garden of their own story, Nkem understood at last. She was no longer the rejected daughter. She was the chosen woman, the loved woman, the free woman. The next morning brought with it a lightness in the air, as if even the wind knew that something sacred was about to happen. In the heart of Kolade's mansion, quiet preparations were already underway. There would be no extravagance, no grand displays, but everything carried an intimate, authentic beauty, just like the love that had grown between him and Nkem. In the main hall, colorful cloths had been laid out, and clay vases filled with flowers picked from the garden filled the room with a fresh scent. The ceremony would be simple but full of truth. The union being sealed that day was a celebration of something that couldn't be bought, the choice of two hearts that recognized each other, even through the shadows of pain. Nkem stood silently before the mirror, wearing a white wrapper with golden details. It was a traditional bridal outfit, but without excess. Nkem's beauty didn't come from jewelry or clothing. It came from the dignity in her eyes, from the steady posture of someone who had survived abandonment and still chose to love. Beside her, a young maid adjusted her braids. "Miss Nkem," she said with a smile, "I've never seen a bride so beautiful." Nkem smiled back, her eyes damp. "Thank you, but the most beautiful part today is that I feel alive." Outside, Kolade waited under the shade of a blooming flamboyant tree. He wore a deep blue agbada, simple but regal. And this time, there was no pretense. He no longer needed to hide. In front of everyone, he stood now as a whole man, flawed, shaped by the past but grounded in the present. The music began with a soft drum beat, followed by the rhythmic sound of a shekira played in ceremonial cadence. Nkem walked toward him slowly, her bare feet touching the stone path with grace and confidence. When she reached Kolade, he extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. "Today, you are mine by choice," he said, his voice steady, filled with emotion. "And I am yours by conviction." Nkem smiled, eyes locked on his. "Today I don't run from the past, I embrace it, because without it, I wouldn't have found you." The traditional priest presiding over the ceremony blessed them with obi leaves, river water, and ancestral words. It was a Yoruba ritual of union, sealed not just by vows, but by the watchful eyes of those who now respected them, former neighbors, staff, even a few market vendors from the village. At the end, Kolade pulled a small necklace from his pocket. It was the same one Nkem had worn as a baby, the only trace left of the mother she never knew. He had had it restored. He handed it to her with trembling hands. "You've always had value, Nkem, even when no one saw it. This necklace is proof that your beginning was never a mistake. It was destiny." She fastened it around her neck, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for keeping it, for keeping me." They embraced, and for the first time, as true husband and wife, without obligation, without secrecy, they sealed with a kiss the love that had endured everything. Days later, sitting on the mansion's veranda, Nkem was writing another letter. But this time it wasn't to Mama Ifa, it was to herself. "Today I look in the mirror and see someone who has learned to love her own story. For so long, I believed my worth depended on being accepted, acknowledged, welcomed. Now I understand. I was worthy even when I was rejected. Kolade didn't save me. He simply gave me space to bloom. And I chose to bloom. She closed the envelope, sealed it with wax, and placed it in her keepsake box. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep orange. Kolade joined her, sat beside her, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about, Iyawomi?" "About how much I've changed, how much we've changed, and how much more we still will." He smiled and kissed her temple. "Want to know a secret?" She looked at him, curious. "I always knew you were different, from the very first day you stepped into that hut, with your eyes down, but your soul standing tall." Nkem laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "And now? Now I see who you truly are." "And who is that?" "A queen who learned to rule with her own hands." There, beneath the calm Nigerian sky, surrounded by everything they had built together, with sweat, tears, and love, Kolade and Nkem knew life would still bring challenges. But they were no longer afraid, because their love hadn't been born from luck. It was forged from the courage to stay, even when everything told them to walk away. And so, between the past that shaped them and the future waiting ahead, they lived the present, the only way it should be lived, with love, with truth, with choice.